Today, global oil prices didn't crash because of some historic peace treaty or, a sudden breakthrough in renewable energy. They actually crashed by 5% in early Asian trade because a global superpower literally ran out of missiles.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to believe when you say it out loud.
Right. But anyway, welcome to today's deep dive brought to you by the RTV Global Network. I am host speaker, and across the table from me is our resident analyst, expert speaker.
I am definitely ready to unravel this massive stack of intelligence you brought us today.
Awesome. So for you listening, today is Monday, 270-72026. And you have handed us just an absolute mountain of breaking news, deep dive investigations, and, well, global shifts from your feed.
There is a lot to get through.
A whole lot. Our mission today is to kind of cut through the noise, connect the dots, and show you exactly how global geopolitics, local underworld escalations, and massive economic pivots are all just violently crashing into each other on this specific day.
Yeah, it's a very specific 24-hour window we're looking at.
Exactly. I mean, we're talking about a window where the U.S. and Iran have hit this really precarious pause. Sri Lanka's underworld is boiling over with 10 shootings in just 2 weeks.
It's just a staggering number.
Right. And then a punitive 44% U.S. tariff has suddenly plummeted to 10%. Oh, and the 2026 FIFA World Cup has crowned a new champion.
I think the underlying theme today is just fragility.
Yeah.
We often assume that the systems governing our world, like international relations, local law enforcement, global supply chains,
That they're solid.
right, that they're robust and deeply anchored.
Yeah.
But the data from today's feed suggests something entirely different. I mean, these systems are incredibly sensitive to minor disruptions.
And we're seeing those disruptions manifest in real time. So let's start with the geopolitical flashpoint, because that missile shortage I mentioned at the top is, well, it's baffling.
It really is.
The United States and Iran have halted attacks after 2 weeks of intense kinetic strikes. And we're hearing from Iran's foreign ministry spokesman, Esmail Baghai, that there's actual progress being made and talks happening in Oman.
Yeah, specifically regarding shipping in the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. But the catalyst for this pause wasn't, a sudden burst of diplomatic goodwill. Reports indicate Donald Trump paused the U.S. strikes due to explicit warnings from the Pentagon of a domestic missile shortage.
Yeah.
So how does the most heavily funded military apparatus in human history simply run out of ammunition? I mean, it feels like hitting pause on a video game right before the boss fight because your controller died.
That's actually a pretty good analogy. It sounds counterintuitive, but modern warfare is entirely dictated by supply chain logistics. It's not just about raw budget.
Okay, so it's not just throwing money at it.
Exactly. We aren't talking about unguided artillery shells forged in some 1940s steel mill. These are highly sophisticated precision-guided munitions. Tomahawk cruise missiles, advanced interceptors.
Right, the really high-tech stuff.
Exactly. Each one is essentially a flying computer. It requires rare earth metals, specialized microchips, and a really lengthy manufacturing process. You can't just flip a switch and print 1,000 more overnight.
So the U.S. defense industrial base is just stretched thin.
Incredibly thin.
Yeah.
I mean, by multiple overlapping global conflicts over the last few years. So when the burn rate of these missiles in the Middle East exceeds the replacement rate from the factories, you hit a hard physical ceiling.
Wow.
The conflict is paused because the math demands it, not the politicians.
So diplomacy is essentially being forced by a logistical bottleneck. But I mean, a senior Iranian official stated they'll hold off on their attacks as long as this U.S. bombing pause holds. That implies a level of deterrence is still at play, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. But
But if we look at the map, the conflict hasn't stopped. It's just shifted coordinates, right? The Red Sea and the Caspian Sea are now fully engulfed. Yemen's Iran-aligned Houthis are heavily targeting shipping, and the Bab al-Mandeb Strait has become an absolute war zone.
and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait is a geographic nightmare for global trade. It is barely 20 miles wide at its narrowest point.
That's tiny.
It is. This is the choke point that connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean. Nearly 10% of all global seaborne trade passes through that narrow sliver of water.
10%. That's massive.
So when the Houthis start launching drones and anti-ship ballistic missiles into that corridor, major shipping companies are forced to reroute their massive container ships around the entire continent of Africa.
Which has to add, what, weeks of time?
Weeks of transit time and millions in fuel costs. But because of this sudden U.S.-Iran pause, this temporary missile-dictated ceasefire.
We saw that massive 5% plunge in global oil prices this morning.
Exactly.
A 5% swing in a single morning is tectonic, but if I'm looking at this critically, that price drop is sort of a phantom, right? It's just an algorithmic market reaction to a headline about a ceasefire. It completely ignores the structural reality that the ceasefire only exists until the U.S. resupplies its missile silos.
That is the exact danger here. The markets are pricing in peace, but they're actually buying a logistical timeout. And this creates a catastrophic dilemma for countries that rely on importing their energy.
Right.
Just look at the local impact in Sri Lanka. The Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, the CPC, is in absolute panic mode today.
Oh, I bet.
They are actively seeking an urgent emergency meeting with the president.
I try to put myself in the shoes of a CPC procurement officer right now, and it just seems impossible. Forward purchasing oil in this environment is like trying to budget for a floating rate mortgage where the interest rate changes every 45 minutes based on the wind speed.
It really is.
How do you secure national fuel supplies without bankrupting the Treasury?
You're basically forced to gamble with sovereign wealth. I mean, the CPC operates on razor-thin margins and immense national debt. They have to lock in contracts for millions of barrels of oil weeks or months in advance.
Right, they can't just buy it day to day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if they buy today, thinking this 5% drop is the new normal, and then tomorrow a Houthi missile strikes a Saudi tanker, oil spikes by 15%, and their entire national budget is obliterated.
Man. And if they wait?
Well, if they wait, hoping the price drops further and the U.S. suddenly resumes strikes, they're caught without supply and face rolling blackouts across the country.
That's terrifying.
It is. The geopolitical fragility in the Middle East translates directly to whether a hospital in Colombo has diesel for its backup generators next month.
It's a terrifying chain of causality. I mean, the lack of a microchip in a U.S. defense plant threatens the electricity supply of an island in the Indian Ocean. And while all eyes are on this kinetic standoff in the Middle East, the European Union just dropped a massive structural bomb of its own.
Yeah, the new strategy paper.
Right. They released this stark, highly aggressive new strategy paper explicitly accusing China of seeking to reshape the global order.
And you have to understand, the timing of that EU paper is incredibly deliberate.
How
Well, the European Union traditionally plays the role of the cautious diplomat. They focus on economic integration rather than, aggressive geopolitical posture.
Right. They usually leave the loud stuff to the U.S.
Exactly. So for Brussels to formally document an accusation that Beijing is actively trying to dismantle and rebuild the global order, that is a massive pivot.
It's a huge statement.
It's signaling that while the U.S. is bogged down playing tactical whack-a-mole with missiles in the Middle East, Europe is focusing on the long-term systemic threat of economic statecraft. China isn't trying to win a shooting war.
No.
They're trying to rewire the financial and technological nervous system of the planet.
The disparity is striking. Superpowers are recalibrating the world order, but when we pull our focus down to the street level in Sri Lanka, the concept of order feels entirely absent.
It does.
I mean, the security situation isn't just fragile. The data suggests it is actively collapsing.
The statistics coming out of the police blotter today are severe. We're looking at 22 distinct shooting incidents so far in 2026, leaving 15 people dead and 12 injured.
But the temporal concentration is the real story here, I think. 10 of those shootings, nearly half of the entire year's violence, occurred in a tiny 2-week window between July 11th and July 25th.
It's incredible.
That is almost a shooting a day. That isn't random crime. That is a systemic rupture. What causes an underworld ecosystem to suddenly detonate like that?
So a sudden violent spike always indicates a disruption in the local balance of power. Organized crime operates on this hidden equilibrium. Gangs have established territories, protection rackets, supply lines.
Right, everyone knows their lane.
Exactly. When you see 10 shootings in 14 days, it usually means a major figure has been removed,
Yeah.
perhaps arrested or assassinated. And that creates a power vacuum.
So everyone scrambles for the top spot.
Yep. Rival factions immediately flood the zone, using lethal violence to claim the abandoned territory before a new equilibrium can settle.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw police just arrest 2 suspects for a shooting in Bellinwilla, but picking up street-level triggers doesn't fix the underlying vacuum.
It's basically a battle for market share, just fought with automatic weapons. But the violence isn't contained to the suburbs or traditional gang territories.
No, it's not.
The most chilling story today happened in the absolute epicenter of the country's economic future, the Colombo port city.
Yeah, this is a big deal.
This is a massive, multi-billion-dollar reclaimed land project designed to be a high-tech international financial center. Yet it just became the scene of a violent confrontation, an abduction, and a brutal murder involving Chinese nationals.
The port city murder fundamentally changes the threat matrix for Sri Lanka. Special economic zones are designed to attract foreign capital with relaxed regulations and tax incentives.
Right.
But historically, anywhere you create a frictionless environment for high-end capital, you simultaneously create a magnet for transnational organized crime.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
The police investigations are revealing that this wasn't just a random mugging, it's a suspected rivalry between Chinese triad groups deeply embedded in cybercrime operations based right there in Sri Lanka.
And two of the suspects were actually intercepted and arrested at the Bandaranaike International Airport, the BIA, attempting to flee the country.
Yes.
Which leads to an identification parade scheduled for today, July 27th. And the Chinese embassy has had to publicly step in, emphasizing that the safety of their nationals is a priority. This is a geopolitical nightmare for the host country.
It is a profound vulnerability. Look, Sri Lanka's local law enforcement is trained and equipped to handle local illicit liquor rings, domestic narcotics distribution, and local gang disputes.
Right.
They are entirely unequipped to dismantle highly sophisticated multinational cybercrime syndicates backed by triad capital.
Because they're just operating on a totally different level.
Exactly. These groups operate with state-level technology, endless resources, and a brutal internal discipline. When their rivalries spill out into physical violence in the middle of your premier financial district, it sends a catastrophic message to legitimate foreign investors.
Absolutely. If a cyber syndicate can execute a rival in the port city, how safe is a legitimate corporate headquarters?
Exactly.
And this brings us to a massive contradiction. To fight transnational cyber triads, you need an incorruptible, highly disciplined, technologically advanced police force. But look at what is making headlines regarding the local police today.
Oh, this story.
The officer in charge, the OIC, of the Hamagama Divisional Crimes Investigation Unit was just arrested by his own colleagues. And the charge? Drunk driving and a horrific hit-and-run that knocked down two young women at two completely different locations before he attempted to flee.
The psychological impact of an OIC committing a hit-and-run is far more damaging than the crime itself, honestly.
Really? Why do you say that?
Because the state operates on a fundamental social contract. Citizens give up their right to use violence, and in return, the state guarantees their safety through a disciplined, lawful police force.
Right, that's the deal.
So when the very officer tasked with investigating violent crimes uses his vehicle as a weapon while intoxicated and then flees the scene like a common criminal, that social contract shatters. It breeds a deep, corrosive cynicism among the public. Why should a citizen respect the badge when the badge doesn't respect the law?
How can local law enforcement handle international cyber gangs when they're struggling with basic internal discipline like that? And that cynicism isn't restricted to the police force. The judiciary is facing its own crisis of public perception today.
The rape case.
Right. A teenager who had been previously convicted of rape was just fully acquitted by a higher court, which cited serious doubts in the prosecution's case.
Now, from a purely legal standpoint, an acquittal based on reasonable doubt is the system working exactly as designed. The burden of proof rests entirely on the state. And if the prosecution fails to meet that burden, the court must acquit to prevent wrongful imprisonment.
Sure, but the public doesn't consume these events in a legal vacuum. They consume them as a narrative.
Exactly.
When you sequence these events in the mind of the listener, 10 gangland assassinations in 2 weeks, foreign triads executing rivals in the financial district, a top police officer pulling a drunken hit and run, and a rape conviction being overturned, the narrative isn't the burden of proof wasn't met. The narrative is the system is entirely incapable of protecting me and the bad guys are winning.
And that perceived breakdown of order creates a permissive environment for even bolder criminal behavior, which perfectly explains the chaotic scene at the BIA.
The airport busts.
The airport is acting as a bizarre microcosm of this systemic stress right now. On one hand, you have Customs and Border Security nabbing a 27-year-old Canadian national trying to smuggle in hashish valued at an astounding 200 million rupees.
200 million rupees in hashish is a massive logistical operation. It requires financing, secure transport, and corrupted officials along the route. It confirms that despite the economic crisis, Sri Lanka remains a highly lucrative node in the global narcotics supply chain.
But the boldness doesn't stop at narcotics. On the exact same day, airport security arrested 2 suspects attempting to smuggle 64 live foreign pigeons into the country.
Wait, what?
Pigeons, valued at over 3.4 million rupees.
This is where I have to pause and ask, why pigeons? I mean, it sounds absurd, but no one risks prison at an international border for a prank. There has to
Yeah.
be an underlying economic driver here.
Oh, there is. It highlights the massive, often overlooked shadow economy of exotic wildlife
Well, the
trafficking.
pigeons.
High-end pigeon racing and breeding is a massively lucrative underground industry in certain parts of Asia and the Middle East. Specific genetic bloodlines can fetch tens of thousands of dollars per bird.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
But beyond the birds themselves, wildlife smuggling routes are often test runs or secondary revenue streams for larger syndicates. If you could figure out how to bribe a customs official to look the other way while you bring in 64 live birds.
You can use that exact same compromised route to bring in synthetic drugs or move weapons. It's a stress test of the border's integrity, which provides a flawless segue into the political theater we're witnessing today. Because while the borders are leaking hashish and exotic birds, and the police are arresting their own for hit and runs, the political establishment has decided that today is the perfect day to launch National Integrity Week.
The irony is suffocating.
It is beyond irony. It feels like deliberate satire. Today, July 27th, the government officially launched a culture of integrity, a clean Sri Lanka.
Right.
This entire initiative is being heavily promoted through a state circular signed by the presidential secretary, Dr. Nandika Kumaniake. It's just full of sweeping mandates about public service reform, transparency, and rooting out corruption.
Yeah, bureaucracies often deploy these grand, sweeping initiatives as a defensive reflex.
What do you mean?
When an institution is fundamentally failing to provide basic security or economic stability, it attempts to regain legitimacy through performative administration. A National Integrity Week requires no structural change. It only requires banners, speeches, and circulars.
Oh, I see.
But it severely backfires when the immediate reality directly contradicts the performance.
And the reality completely annihilated the performance today, because on the exact day they launched this campaign for a clean Sri Lanka, the leader of the opposition, Sajith Premadasa, was formally summoned to appear before the Bribery Commission CIABOC.
The timing is extraordinary.
Right. He was summoned in connection with an ongoing high-profile investigation into the controversial appointment of Chaminda Kularatne as a Deputy Secretary General of Parliament. To add to the political chaos, Premadasa also had to spend the day publicly denying allegations of a backroom political deal with the president of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka.
It's a mess.
Let's break down the mechanics of this for a moment. When the leader of the opposition is hauled before the Bribery Commission on the opening day of Integrity Week, what does that actually signal to the electorate? Because to me, it signals that the mechanisms of accountability are just weapons used in a political knife fight. Is Integrity Week just a PR band-aid on a bullet wound?
That is the exact danger. Look, in a healthy democracy, the Bribery Commission is an independent, terrifyingly objective arbiter of truth. But in highly polarized environments, anti-corruption probes are frequently weaponized.
Right.
Whether the summons is entirely legitimate or politically motivated almost doesn't matter to the public outcome.
Because of the optics.
Exactly. The electorate watches the ruling party launch an integrity campaign while simultaneously aiming the Bribery Commission at their chief rival. The public inevitably concludes that integrity is just a marketing slogan, and the justice system is just another arm of political warfare.
And that weaponization of the justice system is perfectly illustrated by the massive constitutional crisis brewing today over the Supreme Court. We have a fierce, highly technical debate exploding over the potential extension of the tenure for judges in both the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeal.
This isn't just a political squabble. This strikes at the very foundational architecture of the state. You have two completely opposed interpretations of constitutional law battling it out in public.
Right. Break those down for us.
On one side, you have the SLPP national organizer and MP, Namal Rajapaksa. He is advancing a very strict originalist argument.
Okay.
He states that any proposal to artificially extend the tenure of the highest judges fundamentally alters the social contract between the state and the citizen, and therefore it absolutely requires a national referendum.
His argument is that Parliament doesn't have the authority to unilaterally change the rules governing the people who judge Parliament.
Precisely. If a simple parliamentary majority can extend the careers of Supreme Court justices, then those justices become inherently beholden to the politicians who granted them that extension.
Ah, so it destroys the firewall of judicial independence?
Exactly. A referendum forces the decision back to the ultimate sovereign
And that
stone.
is the high-minded constitutional argument. But then you have MP Diasiri, who essentially sets fire to the constitutional textbook and calls it what he thinks it actually is.
Yeah, he was pretty blunt.
He bluntly claims that this proposed extension has nothing to do with systemic reform and is nothing but a calculated, corrupt move to appease the Chief Justice.
Dayasiri is articulating the deep cynicism we just discussed.
Hmm.
He is stripping away the legal jargon and accusing the executive of attempting to buy the loyalty of the judiciary with extended power and salaries.
Now, we aren't a court of law. We can't rule on the constitutional validity of Naimal's argument or the factual basis of Diasiri's accusation. But the critical takeaway for you, the listener, is the environment this creates. You are being asked to navigate an economy where the rules of the game are utterly unpredictable, governed by politicians who are openly accusing each other of rigging the Supreme Court.
Right.
It creates a massive risk premium for anyone trying to live or do business in this country.
And that transitions us perfectly into the economic data from today. Because the business sector doesn't have the luxury of debating constitutional theory. They have to deal with the immediate, visceral reality of what I like to call an economic ecosystem of extremes.
It is truly an economic whack-a-mole today. Just when you think a sector is stabilizing, a completely new, bizarre crisis erupts elsewhere. But let's start with the stabilization, because there is a massive, tangible victory on the board today for Sri Lanka's exporters.
This is a lifeline. Sri Lanka was swept up in a massive U.S. trade dispute, facing punitive tariffs under a Section 301 action.
Sorry.
Today, it was announced that a crushing 44% U.S. tariff has plummeted down to just 10%.
Okay, we hear the word tariff thrown around on the news constantly, but let's explain the actual mechanics of a Section 301 action. Why was a 44% tariff applied in the first place, and how does a drop to 10% actually change the reality on the factory floor in Colombo?
Sure. So Section 301 of the U.S. Trade Act of 1974 is essentially a heavy economic club. It grants the U.S. government the authority to investigate and unilaterally respond to foreign trade practices that it deems unfair, discriminatory, or harmful to U.S. commerce. When a 44% tariff is applied, it means that if a Sri Lankan manufacturer produces a garment for $100, the U.S. importer has to pay an additional $44 in taxes just to bring it into the country.
Wow.
It immediately makes the Sri Lankan product wildly uncompetitive compared to a competitor in Vietnam or Bangladesh who doesn't face that tariff. Buyers cancel orders, production lines halt, and thousands of factory workers lose their jobs.
It's an economic strangulation tactic.
Exactly. So successfully negotiating that tariff down to 10% removes the chokehold. It brings the pricing back into a competitive margin.
So the orders will resume, the factories will spin back up, and the export revenue, which brings desperately needed U.S. dollars into the Sri Lankan economy, will start flowing again.
Right.
And pairing with that injection of momentum, we also saw the Asian Development Bank, the ADB, formally approve $200 million in emergency assistance, specifically for post-cyclone Ditwa recovery. So foreign reserves are being bolstered from two different angles.
On a macroeconomic spreadsheet, those are incredibly positive indicators. But the problem with macroeconomic spreadsheets is that they often obscure catastrophic microeconomic mismanagement.
Which brings us to the national carrier, Sri Lankan Airlines.
Oh boy.
The new chairman, Dimal Arandara, is currently facing a tidal wave of public and corporate backlash over his new strategic proposals.
The leaks coming out of the boardroom are describing his plans as ego-driven expansions. He's reportedly pushing for an aggressive rollout of new routes across Europe, Asia, and Africa.
Now, in a vacuum, if a company is recovering, expansion is the logical next step. But the context surrounding this airline is staggering.
It really is.
They are proposing a massive, capital-intensive global expansion while simultaneously drowning in soaring fleet maintenance costs. And this is the most unbelievable part. They are doing it without a chief executive officer. They have a complete leadership vacuum at the operational level.
It is corporate malpractice. Opening a new international route isn't just drawing a line on a map. It requires leasing new, incredibly expensive aircraft, securing highly competitive landing slots at international hubs, hiring specialized crew, and launching massive marketing campaigns in foreign jurisdictions.
Right.
Doing this while your current fleet is bleeding cash in maintenance bays is risky. Attempting it without a permanent CEO to oversee the granular daily logistics of the rollout is essentially setting fire to the treasury. The chairman sets the vision, but the CEO executes. They are trying to build an empire without an emperor.
And as a taxpayer who ultimately underwrites the losses of a state-owned airline, it is infuriating. The state fights tooth and nail to save a few $1 million on U.S. export tariffs, only for the airline chairman to seemingly blow it on an ego-driven route to Europe. It's a total economic whack-a-mole for you as a consumer. Where is the consistency here?
There isn't any.
And we see that same inconsistency rippling through the automotive sector today.
Yeah, the situation at the Hambantota port is a glaring red flag for the broader economy. Customs officials are preparing to auction off over 1,000 completely uncleared vehicles that have been abandoned at the port.
Why would a commercial importer go through the massive hassle and expense of shipping a vehicle all the way to Sri Lanka only to abandon it on the docks?
It exposes a massive, hidden liquidity crisis within the banking sector. An importer orders those vehicles based on a letter of credit from a bank, assuming they will have the cash flow to pay the massive import duties when the ship arrives.
Right.
But between the time the ship leaves port and arrives in Hambantota, the local financial environment has violently shifted.
The credit dries up.
Exactly. The local banks tighten their lending, the importer suddenly cannot secure the short-term financing needed to clear customs, and the vehicles are trapped in bureaucratic purgatory.
They just sit there.
They sit in the salt air, depreciating daily, until the government seizes them. It is a massive destruction of capital.
And there is a fascinating nuance to the auto market being reported today. We are seeing a surge in auto credit, heavily driven by the rise of Chinese compact crossover brands. But analysts are warning that this recovery is a mirage, heavily masked by the fact that auto dealers are dodging massive inventory penalties by manipulating their financing.
The cost of borrowing money is crushing these businesses right now. The prime lending rate, the rate banks charge their most creditworthy corporate customers, has just hit a fresh, brutal high of 10.46%.
Wow.
And what's fascinating is that this is happening even as the central bank holds its official policy rate steady.
Let's explain that disconnect. If the central bank isn't raising rates, why are the commercial banks jacking up the cost of borrowing to nearly 10.5%?
Because the commercial banks are pricing in the underlying risk that the central bank refuses to acknowledge. The central bank holds the rate steady to project stability. But the commercial banks look at the 1,000 abandoned cars in Hambantota, they look at the political chaos, and they realize the risk of default is skyrocketing. So they unilaterally raise the prime rate to protect their own balance sheets. They're essentially saying, we don't trust the stability of this economy, so if you want our money, you are going to pay a massive premium for it.
And businesses aren't just getting squeezed by the banks, they're getting suffocated by compliance. Legal experts today are sounding the alarm over a highly complex, almost unnavigable regulatory landscape created by the staggered rollout of the Personal Data Protection Act, the PDPA.
Data protection laws are globally necessary, sure, but the implementation in Sri Lanka is turning into an administrative nightmare. A staggered rollout means the government is applying the law piece by piece to different sectors at different times with varying degrees of enforcement.
It creates a fog of war for a corporate compliance officer.
Exactly. If you run a mid-sized tech firm or a retail chain that handles customer data, you have no clear baseline. Are you legally exposed today, or does your sector have a grace period until next year?
You just don't know.
The ambiguity forces companies to spend millions on legal counsel rather than investing in growth, simply to ensure they don't accidentally step on a regulatory landmine.
But if you want to talk about regulatory landmines, we have to talk about the story out of Ella today. This is the microeconomic story that perfectly encapsulates the absolute heavy-handedness of the state right now. A small local tourist hotel in the picturesque town of Ella was just slapped with an astronomical fine of 1 million rupees.
Yeah.
The offense: they overpriced a plastic bottle of drinking water.
1 million rupees for a water bottle. On a purely legal level, it's a staggering violation of proportionality. The punishment so vastly exceeds the crime that it feels absurd. But we have to analyze the macroeconomic terror driving this decision.
The government is terrified of losing the tourist dollar.
Tourism is the only fast-acting medicine this economy has right now. It is the primary engine bringing foreign currency directly into the country. But in the hyper-connected modern travel economy, Reputation is everything.
Right. Everybody reviews everything.
A tourist doesn't just get annoyed by a $10 bottle of water.
Hmm.
They go on TripAdvisor, they go on Reddit, they go on TikTok, and they broadcast that Sri Lanka is a ripoff.
The macroeconomic impact of a bad review.
Precisely. If that narrative takes hold globally, the golden goose dies. So the government, lacking the sophisticated tools to gently regulate pricing across thousands of informal vendors, resorts to a draconian performative strike.
They fine one small hotel ₹1,000,000 to send a shockwave of terror through the entire hospitality sector.
Yep. It's an incredibly brutal, blunt instrument, but it highlights how desperate the state is to protect its only functioning revenue stream.
And just to provide a sense of scale to this economic chaos, we look globally today. While Sri Lankan businesses are choking on a 10.46% prime lending rate, the Bank of Japan made global headlines by raising their main interest rate to 1%.
And that 1% is the highest rate Japan has seen since 1995.
It's a completely different economic universe. A 1% rate in Tokyo causes a generational shockwave across global bond markets, while a 10.5% rate in Colombo is just a Tuesday.
It's wild.
It really illustrates the massive disparity in global capital. But the harsh reality for the listener is that this economic instability isn't happening in a spreadsheet. It is playing out against a backdrop of severe, immediate environmental and public health crises that are pushing the social fabric to its absolute tearing point.
The physical environment is actively turning hostile. The Department of Meteorology issued a stark warning today that the already oppressive hot weather is expected to significantly intensify as we move into next month.
Though there is a minor reprieve expected with some increased rainfall in the southwestern parts starting tomorrow, July 28th.
True, but the baseline temperature is triggering a cascade of secondary disasters.
Yeah, the fire data is terrifying. The fire service reported today that the Colombo district and its immediate surrounding areas have already seen over 250 separate fire incidents this year. 250.
When you have intense, sustained heat, coupled with a dense urban environment that likely has compromised electrical grids and poor waste management, combustion becomes inevitable.
And it is spreading to the protected ecosystems. A massive wildfire just ignited and tore through the Bomburu Ela Forest Reserve. It has completely destroyed over 20 acres of protected, ecologically vital land before it could be contained.
It's heartbreaking.
You have an underfunded state apparatus trying to fight urban fires, forest fires, and a collapsed economy simultaneously.
And as the heat rises, the biological threats multiply. We are in the epicenter of a massive public health emergency today. The National Dengue Control Unit has been forced to launch a nationwide, highly aggressive mosquito control campaign.
They timed this campaign to coincide with that National Integrity Week we discussed, presumably hoping to utilize some of that bureaucratic mobilization. But the messaging coming from the health authorities today isn't bureaucratic. It is bordering on desperation.
It really is.
They are publicly begging parents to seek immediate professional medical treatment if a child's fever persists for more than 24 hours. And speaking of tragedy, a 4-year-old child died in a road accident in Molokata, and a National Drowning Prevention Committee is finally being formed. But back to the dengue issue.
Right. The tragedy of dengue is that with immediate hydration and medical monitoring, the mortality rate is incredibly low. But the authorities are reporting a severe spike in patients becoming critically ill, falling into shock, and dying.
And why is that?
Because they are delaying hospital admission to rely on unverified, completely unscientific home remedies they found on social media.
This is where the collapse of institutional trust becomes lethal. In a vacuum of reliable leadership, people turn to their immediate social networks for truth. A forwarded WhatsApp message claiming that a specific boiled leaf cures dengue instantly bypasses the entire medical establishment.
It is an epistemological crisis. When an exhausted, terrified parent trusts a viral meme over a pediatrician, they delay the vital 5E fluids until the child's organs are already shutting down. The state isn't just fighting a mosquito. They are fighting the architecture of modern misinformation.
And the contrast on the global wire today makes this feel almost dystopian. While health workers in Sri Lanka are fighting lethal WhatsApp rumors, China is releasing massive state-backed studies arguing that advanced artificial intelligence can now be utilized to help the world prepare for and predict extreme weather events.
The technological divergence is staggering. One hemisphere is utilizing quantum computing and AI to model fluid dynamics in the atmosphere, and the other hemisphere is dying because a chat app convinced them a leaf cures a hemorrhagic fever.
People are dealing with dengue, raging wildfires, and extreme heat. Yet at the same time, China is arguing that AI can help the world prepare for extreme weather. Why are we relying on unverified home remedies while global superpowers are using AI to predict the climate?
It's the friction between tradition, misinformation, and modern crises. The dengue crisis is exacerbated by social media misinformation.
And this level of systemic stress, the heat, the disease, the economic suffocation, it fundamentally changes human behavior. We are seeing social friction erupting in highly localized, very personal ways today. People are lashing out at the institutions closest to them.
You see it perfectly at Thurston College today. It's a prominent, highly respected national school in Colombo. A massive controversy has erupted simply over a dry ration collection drive initiated by the school.
In normal times, a school asking for a few bags of rice or lentils for a charity drive is a non-issue. But today, it has deeply, violently angered the parents.
Because in this economy, an extra bag of rice isn't a casual donation. It is a critical calculation in a family's survival budget.
Right.
The parents view this not as charity, but as an unbearable, unofficial tax imposed by an institution that is supposed to be free. The economic trauma turns a community initiative into a flashpoint for class anger.
And that anger is infecting the professional classes as well. The Ceylon Teachers Union, the CTU, released a scathing condemnation today regarding a decision by the education authorities to hold a compulsory administrative meeting for school principals in the Candy Zone.
And the outrage stems entirely from the scheduling. The meeting was mandated on a Poya Day.
Which is huge.
It is. Poya Days are not just bank holidays. They are deeply sacred, legally protected religious observances tied to the lunar cycle in Sri Lanka. Mandating compulsory bureaucratic work on a Poya Day is viewed as a profound insult.
It sends a message to the teachers that the state views their religious and cultural rhythms as subservient to administrative efficiency. In a society already feeling stripped of its agency by the economy, people fiercely protect their cultural dignity.
And we're seeing that exact dynamic play out with law enforcement and tradition today. The police have officially stepped in and strongly recommended removing the traditional Kavadi dance performance from the upcoming procession of the historic Divinuwara Perahera.
The Kavadi dance is an intense, physical, often ecstatic act of religious devotion. It is a cornerstone of the procession. The police are demanding its removal, citing vague security concerns.
Which traces right back to those 10 gangland shootings we talked about.
Exactly. The police force is so violently stretched, so paranoid about the collapsing security environment, that their only tool is suppression. They cannot guarantee safety in a crowd, so they mandate the removal of centuries-old cultural practices to thin the herd.
It is the state prioritizing operational convenience over cultural heritage.
And in an environment of high anxiety and institutional suppression, rumors become the dominant currency. A massive rumor swept through social media claiming that the Srivijaya Buddhist Dhamma School, which operates for the expatriate community in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, was being aggressively forced to close by foreign authorities.
It caused an immediate uproar. The authorities had to scramble today to issue a formal official clarification entirely debunking the claim. The school is safe and open.
But the speed and ferocity with which that rumor took hold is the real data point. The public is so traumatized, so accustomed to loss and systemic failure, that they are primed to believe that their institutions, even those thousands of miles away in the desert, are under imminent attack.
Is a society suffering from collective chronic stress?
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most psychologically necessary section of today's deep dive. When a society is trapped in a pressure cooker of crime, heat, and economic whack-a-mole, human beings require an escape valve. We require a narrative of triumph that has nothing to do with tariffs or dengue fever. And this weekend delivered massive historic moments in global and local sports.
Sports provide the illusion of a perfect meritocracy. In the real world, the OIC does a hit and run and gets away, and the hotel gets fined 1 million rupees unfairly. But on the pitch, or on the track, the rules are absolute, and the fastest or the most skilled wins. It is deeply therapeutic.
And the ultimate global therapy session just concluded. The 2026 FIFA World Cup has officially crowned its champion.
A phenomenal tournament.
Spain has conquered the world again. They defeated the defending champions, Argentina, 1-0 in a grueling, nail-biting final that went deep into extra time. Ferran Torres found the back of the net to give Spain their second World Cup title in history.
The geopolitical weight of the World Cup is fascinating. For 120 minutes, national economies don't matter. But it also means that Lionel Messi's Argentina, despite a heroic run to reach the absolute pinnacle again, fell agonizingly short at the final hurdle.
Though it wouldn't be 2026 without a bizarre twist of chaos. The triumph of the tournament was slightly shadowed by a breaking scandal. A World Cup player has reportedly tested positive for cocaine after being pulled over by police for erratic speeding.
Oh, wow.
The highs of global athleticism crashing immediately into the realities of human failing.
It's a stark reminder of the pressure these athletes operate under.
And the pressure in football management is equally absurd. Jurgen Klopp, one of the most legendary managers of the modern era, officially started his highly anticipated reign as the manager of the German national team. And his first act, he immediately threatened to quit over internal structural disputes.
The leverage of a superstar manager. He knows the Federation needs him more than he needs them, so he immediately goes on the offensive to secure operational control.
And in the Premier League, the sheer scale of the capital involved continues to defy gravity. Arsenal is reportedly preparing a massive £70 million bid to extract Bruno Guimaraes from Newcastle United. While countries are fighting over million-dollar IMF tranches, football clubs are casually tossing £70 million at a single midfielder.
It highlights the total detachment of elite sports from the macroeconomy.
But let's bring the focus back home, because the local sporting landscape experienced a deeply emotional, historic transition this weekend.
We witnessed the closing of a monumental chapter.
Yupun Abekun. The man known as South Asia's fastest man has officially, formally called time on his glittering athletics career. He is retiring.
To understand Yupin's legacy, you have to look beyond the medal tally. In a country that has historically struggled to produce world-class sprinters, Yupun didn't just break records. He shattered a massive psychological barrier.
Right.
He proved to an entire generation of young, underfunded athletes in Sri Lanka that a human being from this island could physically stand on a track in Europe or America and outrun the fastest men on Earth. He built the infrastructure of belief.
That is beautifully put. The infrastructure of belief. It's wild to think that Yupun Abekun is hanging up his spikes on the exact same weekend Spain makes history on the global stage. It's a passing of the torch for sports fans. And it is incredibly poignant that on the exact same weekend Yupun exits the stage, a new prodigy arrives to take up that mantle of belief.
Yvonne David.
Yevon David just achieved something genuinely unthinkable a decade ago. He secured a podium finish in the fiercely competitive, highly elite world of Formula 3 racing. We are looking at a Sri Lankan flag flying over an FIA single-seater podium.
Motorsport is perhaps the most brutally capital-intensive, technologically exclusionary sport on the planet. For a Sri Lankan driver to break through the European karting ranks and secure an F3 podium requires not just immense physical talent, but an ability to navigate a highly complex, elite ecosystem.
It's an incredible achievement.
For the youth watching at home facing massive economic headwinds, seeing Yevon succeed in that specific arena is a powerful counter-narrative to the daily gloom.
It proves that excellence can still pierce through the chaos, and that passion for excellence is just as visceral at the grassroots level. In local school rugby, which commands a fanatical following here, Sean Elthoff just led his Trinity College team to an absolutely flawless, unbeaten season. They capped it off with a massive Bradby Shield victory, and the local press is already cementing them in history, calling them the Immortals of 2026.
School rugby in Sri Lanka is a fascinating sociological phenomena. It generates loyalties and crowds that rival professional leagues in Europe. It serves as a generational bonding mechanism.
And speaking of professional leagues, the Lanka Premier League, the LPL, delivered its mandate of pure, unadulterated entertainment this weekend.
Oh, absolutely.
The Galley Gallants experienced a wild psychological roller coaster. They were initially dismantled by the Dambulla Sixers, but rather than collapsing, they rallied and cruised to a dominant third win. We saw the Jaffna Kings edge out a terrifyingly close 5-run thriller. And perhaps most satisfyingly for the underdogs, the Kandy Royals finally got their first win on the board through sheer grinding effort.
The LPL is highly engineered escapism. For 3 hours, the only inflation that matters is the run rate.
Exactly. To close out our deep dive today, we gathered a few global oddities from the feed. These are the stories that don't fit into a macroeconomic model, but they prove the world is still profoundly strange and capable of closure.
The Pan Am discovery is a perfect example of historical closure.
Yes. A deep-sea research team has finally located and captured high-resolution images of the wreckage of a Pan Am plane, 74 years after it tragically crashed into the ocean. For over 7 decades, families had zero answers. And today, technology finally illuminated a ghost from the past.
It shows that the ocean eventually yields its secrets, provided the technology advances far enough.
And in modern urban problem solving, we have a fantastic story out of Thailand. A local guy on TikTok has become an absolute folk hero.
I love this one.
He is solving Bangkok's legendary soul-crushing parking nightmare by using social media to coordinate and shame illegal parking syndicates. He is doing with a smartphone what the municipal police failed to do for decades.
The decentralization of civic enforcement.
Right. For the pop culture historians, original screen-used dragon eggs from the filming of Game of Thrones are heading to a massive auction. The bidding wars are already aggressive, and they are expected to fetch a small, literal fortune, the monetization of modern mythology.
And finally, a very real, very tangible piece of diplomatic goodwill. The government of India has officially reinstated its free visa scheme, specifically for Sri Lankan pilgrims traveling to sacred Buddhist sites in India.
In a region dominated by tense border standoffs and trade wars, allowing thousands of devotees to travel freely for spiritual reasons is a rare, beautiful piece of soft diplomacy.
Which brings our massive deep dive full circle.
It truly does. What a relentless velocity this day has had at July 27, 2026. We've traced a line through a day where the physical lack of a missile in a U.S. bunker dictated the price of oil in a port in Asia.
Yeah.
We saw a day where highly advanced transnational cyber triads executed a rival in a financial hub operating right next door to smugglers moving hashish and exotic pigeons. We documented a day where a small-town hotel's overpriced water bottle resulted in a draconian million-rupee fine designed to save a national industry, all while the state airline plots a massive multi-continent expansion without a CEO to steer the ship.
We spent the last hour dissecting the mechanics of these events, the supply chains, the referendums, the power vacuums. But I want to leave you with a final thought that shifts the perspective entirely.
All right, let's hear it.
We talked heavily about the physical borders of Sri Lanka today, the airport smuggling, the port auctions, the trade tariffs. But consider this, the sheer irrelevance of the nation-state in solving modern crises.
The irrelevance of the nation-state. Explain that.
Look at the threats we mapped today. The economic inflation is driven by global interest rates and U.S. logistics. The violence in the port city is driven by borderless, transnational cyber capital.
Right.
The environmental fires and extreme heat are driven by global climate shifts. The dengue fatalities are driven by borderless, algorithmic social media platforms amplifying misinformation.
That's a huge point.
Every single major threat currently dismantling the local reality is entirely borderless. It operates transnationally, yet our solutions are strictly, stubbornly bordered.
We try to fight global cyber triads with a local OIC.
We try to fight global inflation with a local water bottle fine. We try to fight a collapse of institutional trust with a localized National Integrity Week circular.
Wow.
As you go about your week, look at the problems in your own industry, your community, and ask yourself, are we failing because we are using bordered, localized tools to fight borderless transnational phenomena?
That is a staggering perspective to end on. If the threat matrix is borderless, a bordered solution isn't just inefficient, it is fundamentally obsolete. Thank you so much for joining us on this massive deep dive. Stay curious, question the tools you're using to fight your battles, and most importantly, stay well informed. We will see you next time.